Have you ever found yourself holding a product, suddenly realizing you bought it for one reason and one reason only? Because a famous face, a celebrity you admire, looked into the camera and told you it was amazing. We've all been there, caught in that magnetic pull of star power, where logic takes a backseat and a simple recommendation feels like an invitation into an exclusive club. But what happens when that trust is placed in the most bizarre, the most baffling, the most utterly inexplicable partnerships imaginable? Welcome to the wild, wonderful, and often downright weird world of celebrity endorsements. This is a landscape built on a simple, powerful idea that fame can sell anything, and for over a century, that idea has led to some of the most absurd, head-scratching marketing campaigns in American history. Today, we're going on a journey deep into this strange territory, moving beyond the predictable perfumes and sneakers to uncover the true outliers, the ads that made everyone stop and ask why. Picture this: a beloved Hollywood icon, the person you've watched command the silver screen for decades, now sitting in a cozy living room setting, earnestly praising the revolutionary qualities of a radium-laced health tonic. Or a chart-topping music superstar known for their gritty, authentic persona, suddenly appearing in a commercial for a children's breakfast cereal, their lyrics replaced by a jingle about marshmallows. These aren't just mismatches, they are cultural collisions, moments where the carefully crafted image of a celebrity smashes headlong into a product so utterly unrelated that it creates a kind of advertising surrealism. It's in these moments that we see the raw and sometimes reckless engine of commerce at work, an engine fueled by the belief that any product, no matter how mundane or questionable, can be transformed by a little stardust. The results are often less about effective sales and more about a fascinating snapshot of our culture, our obsessions, and the sometimes desperate lengths companies will go to for our attention. So prepare yourself for a tour through the looking glass of American marketing. We are about to dive into the archives and uncover the most absurd celebrity endorsements in U.S. history. We'll explore the forgotten fads, the questionable health claims, and the plain old, peculiar products that somehow convinced some of the biggest names in the world to lend their credibility. This is a story of astonishing paychecks and puzzling career choices, a testament to the idea that when enough money is on the table, even the most discerning star might just agree to sell you something truly unforgettable. Get ready to be surprised, to laugh, and to maybe, just maybe, look at that next celebrity ad with a much more skeptical eye. The journey into the absurd starts now. Our journey into the bizarre begins not in the distant past with snake oil, but in the not too distant future, or at least with a man who famously pretended to go there. In the late 1990s, as the dot-com boom was reshaping the American economy, a new company called Priceline emerged with a revolutionary idea, allowing customers to name their own price for airline tickets and hotel rooms. It was a complex, almost counterintuitive concept for the average traveler, and the company needed a spokesperson who could explain it, make it trustworthy, and maybe even make it a little bit exciting. Who do they turn to? A starship captain from the 23rd century, William Shatner, the legendary Commander James T. Kirk of Star Trek, became the official face of Priceline, and in doing so, launched one of the most successful, longest-running, and flat-out weirdest endorsement campaigns in advertising history. The genius and the sheer absurdity of this partnership lay in its execution. Shatner didn't appear as a slick, polished salesman. Instead, he leaned into a persona that was already becoming beloved in pop culture, a slightly baffled, overly earnest, and wonderfully quirky version of himself. The commercials were often musical, featuring Shatner delivering a spoken-word jingle, a style he famously pioneered, that explained the intricacies of the name-your-own-price model. He wasn't just reading lines, he was performing them with a unique cadence, a series of dramatic pauses and emphatic stresses that made the process of booking a discount hotel room feel like a cosmic quest. The tagline, Priceline Negotiator, painted him not as a celebrity shill, but as a powerful ally, a galactic ambassador who would descend to Earth to do battle with high travel prices on your behalf. It was a role only William Shatner could play, blending his iconic sci-fi heroism with a self-aware, almost goofy charm. What made this endorsement so effective and so enduring was its masterful subversion of expectation. Here was a man synonymous with exploring strange new worlds and seeking out new life, now passionately concerned with helping you save $50 on a flight to Cleveland. The disconnect was the entire point. It was memorable precisely because it was so unexpected. For over a decade, Shatner was inescapable, his distinct voice and presence making Priceline a household name. The campaign was a phenomenal success, reportedly earning Shatner hundreds of millions of dollars in stock options and solidifying his status as a pop culture treasure for a new generation. He wasn't just selling a service, he was validating it. If Captain Kirk trusted Priceline to get a good deal, then surely it was safe for the rest of us. This partnership proved that an endorsement didn't have to be a straightforward, logical fit to work. Sometimes the most powerful combination is the one that makes you smile, scratch your head, and then, just maybe, click on the website to see if you can indeed get a room at a 4-star hotel for the price of a 3-star one. And yet, where William Shatner's genius was in his theatrical, almost otherworldly strangeness, our next example finds its profound absurdity in something quite the opposite: breathtaking normalcy. From the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, we travel now to a simple, everyday living room where we find perhaps the most dominant athlete of the 20th century. Michael Jordan was, by the 1990s, far more than a basketball player. He was a global icon, a symbol of relentless pursuit of excellence, a figure who seemed to float in the air, defying gravity itself. His very name was synonymous with peak performance, with victory, with a kind of superhuman prowess. So, what product could possibly be worthy of such a deity? The answer, it turned out, was a simple, comfortable pair of underwear. The partnership between Michael Jordan and Hanes wasn't just a success, it was a masterclass in taking one of the most mundane products imaginable and elevating it through the sheer, undeniable power of a superstar's relaxed charm. The commercials themselves were studies in deliberate contrast. They often featured Jordan in the most ordinary of settings, sitting on a couch, leaning against a kitchen counter, or chatting with other celebrity endorsers like the actor Cuba Gooding Jr. There were no slam dunks, no championship trophies, no roaring crowds. Instead, the focus was on pure, unadulterated comfort. Jordan would deliver his lines with that famous, easygoing smile, his voice a calm and reassuring baritone. He wasn't selling you on becoming a champion, he was selling you on the simple, reliable pleasure of a soft cotton t-shirt or a pair of briefs that wouldn't bunch up. This was the core of the absurdity. Here was a man whose athletic endorsements for Nike had literally created a subculture of Air Jordan fanatics, now using the exact same credibility to assure you that his underwear was pleasantly non-irritating. The cognitive dissonance was the entire point. If a person who operated at the absolute physical limit of human potential trusted Hanes for something as fundamental as his basic comfort, then surely the brand was good enough for the rest of us. This campaign worked for decades, not in spite of its mundanity, but because of it. Where other athletic endorsements sold a fantasy of performance and power, Hanes sold a fantasy of relatable ease. It made Michael Jordan accessible. You couldn't jump like Mike, but you could, theoretically, wear the same underwear. It was a small, affordable piece of the Jordan empire, a slice of his implied good taste and judgment that anyone could own. The ads leaned into a gentle, self-aware humor, acknowledging the oddity of the situation without ever breaking character. Jordan never seemed out of place. His coolness was so immense that it could effortlessly envelop even a conversation about fabric softness. This long-running partnership demonstrated a different kind of endorsement alchemy. It wasn't about matching a celebrity to a logically connected product, but about transferring a feeling. Hanes wasn't buying Michael Jordan's athleticism, they were buying his aura of effortless, unshakable cool and applying it to a product that desperately needed just that. It was a quiet, brilliant, and wonderfully absurd reminder that sometimes the most powerful sell is the one that makes a global icon feel like your comfortable, trustworthy neighbor. But if Michael Jordan taught us that a superstar could sell the simple comforts of life, the next figure on our list took that principle and ran with it, right out of the boxing ring and into the kitchen. After witnessing the quiet cool of a basketball legend, we now enter the warm, sizzling, and overwhelmingly successful world of George Foreman and the George Foreman Grill. This is perhaps the quintessential story of an endorsement so perfect, so symbiotic, that it transcends mere advertising and becomes a part of American folklore. Here was George Foreman, a two-time world heavyweight boxing champion, a man who had literally fought Muhammad Ali in the Rumble in the Jungle. He was a figure of immense physical power and intimidating presence. And in the 1990s, he leveraged that entire reputation to sell America on a small, plastic, electric kitchen appliance that promised to drain the fat away from our food. The origin story of this partnership is what elevates it from a simple business deal to a marketing legend. The grill itself was invented by a man named Michael Bohm, but its initial iterations struggled to find an audience. The product needed a face, a story, something to make it more than just another piece of clutter for the countertop. They found their story in George Foreman, who was in the midst of a remarkable personal and professional comeback. The older, gentler Foreman of the 90s was a beloved figure, a preacher with a booming laugh and a relatable persona. He famously spoke of his own large family, mentioning that he had so many sons named George that he needed a way to cook for them all quickly and healthily. This wasn't a fabricated marketing line, it felt authentic. He was a father first who needed a practical solution for his own household. That genuine need became the entire sales pitch. The George Foreman Grill wasn't just a product, it was a personal necessity for a beloved public figure, and by extension, it could be a solution for your family, too. The marketing campaign was a masterstroke of simplicity. The commercials often featured Foreman himself, his massive hands holding the surprisingly compact grill, that famous grin spread across his face. He would talk about the lean, mean, fat-reducing grilling machine, a tagline that perfectly captured the product's function while cleverly nodding to his own boxing pedigree. The sound of the sizzle as the grease dripped into the detachable tray became an auditory icon of the era. The genius was in the juxtaposition. You saw this formidable, powerful man, a literal heavyweight champion of the world, enthusiastically endorsing a domestic product. It was unexpected, but it was also incredibly endearing. He wasn't just a hired spokesman, he was the namesake. His identity was fused with the product in a way that few endorsements ever achieve. People didn't just buy a grill, they bought a George Foreman. The results were nothing short of astronomical. The George Foreman Grill didn't just sell well, it became a cultural phenomenon, a staple in dorm rooms, apartments, and homes across the nation. To date, over 100 million units have been sold, making it one of the most successful small appliances in history. The financial outcome for Foreman was staggering. He had sold the rights to use his name for a lump sum and a share of the ongoing profits, a deal that ultimately earned him well over $200 million. Let that sink in for a moment. George Foreman, a man who earned millions in the ring, made more money from selling grills than he ever did from throwing punches. He often jokes that he lost to Muhammad Ali in Zaire, but won the rematch in the kitchen, and the numbers prove he's right. This endorsement didn't just make him wealthy, it fundamentally reshaped his legacy for an entire generation, transforming him from a fearsome pugilist into everybody's favorite grill-loving uncle. It was a perfect storm of the right person with the right story, endorsing the right product at the right time, proving that the most powerful endorsement of all is one that feels genuinely useful and undeniably real. Where Michael Jordan and George Foreman excelled at making the extraordinary feel relatable, the next chapter in our story hurtled in the complete opposite direction, transforming the simple act of drinking a soda into a full-blown cinematic spectacle. At the dawn of the new millennium, a new pop princess reigned supreme, and her name was Britney Spears. She was more than just a singer, she was a global phenomenon, a meticulously crafted icon of teen pop perfection, and corporations were falling over themselves to be associated with her skyrocketing fame. In 2001, Pepsi secured what was then one of the largest celebrity endorsement deals in history, reportedly worth up to $50 million, and they were determined to get their money's worth. They didn't just want commercials, they wanted to create cultural events, mini-movies that would blur the line between advertising and art, and in the process, they gave us some of the most gloriously over-the-top ads ever produced. The centerpiece of this campaign was a pair of commercials so lavishly produced and conceptually wild that they are seared into the memory of an entire generation. The first, set in a futuristic gladiatorial arena, was a tour de force of sheer ambition. It opens on a roaring crowd as Britney, clad in a metallic outfit, struts through the Colosseum. But she isn't fighting lions or warriors, she's battling different eras of music. She confronts a knight representing classical music, a group of disco dancers, and even a troupe of hip-hop artists, all while performing her hit song, Joy of Pepsi. Each musical style is presented as a challenge to be overcome, with Pepsi emerging as the universal, unifying victor. The production values were staggering, featuring intricate costumes, complex choreography, and special effects that wouldn't look out of place in a major motion picture. This wasn't a simple 30-second spot, it was a 3-minute epic where the fate of popular culture seemed to hinge on the choice of a carbonated beverage. The second major ad took this maximalist philosophy and applied it to a medieval fantasy setting. In this spot, Britney plays a royal figure in a castle, bored with her stuffy surroundings. She spots a traveling merchant carrying a chest of Pepsi, and upon drinking one, she is instantly transported, not literally, but in spirit, into a modern-day street party where she dances with a diverse, joyful crowd. The commercial seamlessly cuts between the vibrant, contemporary celebration and the drab, stone castle, with the castle's guards and courtiers looking on in bewilderment. The message was clear and powerful. Pepsi wasn't just a drink, it was a magical portal to a more exciting, more liberated world. It was youth, energy, and rebellion bottled, a direct challenge to the established order, perfectly mirroring Britney's own public persona as the girl next door who is also a boundary-pushing superstar. What made these endorsements so emblematic of their time was the sheer scale of the ambition. Pepsi wasn't selling a taste or a price point, they were selling an identity. By associating their brand so completely with Britney Spears, they were tapping directly into the aspirational dreams of millions of teenagers. To drink a Pepsi was to have a small, affordable piece of Britney's world, a world of glamour, power, and non-stop excitement. The commercials functioned as extended music videos, receiving heavy rotation on channels like MTV and becoming talking points in their own right. The line between the artist and the product became beautifully, absurdly blurred. You weren't sure if you were watching Britney star in a Pepsi ad, or if Pepsi had simply become a co-star in the ongoing blockbuster that was Britney Spears' life. This was the peak of the music superstar endorsement, an era where the commercial wasn't a side project but an integral part of the artist's mythology, a testament to the idea that in the new century, fame itself was the most valuable commodity, and it could be used to sell absolutely anything, even if it required building an entire Roman empire or a fairy tale castle to do it. But for every carefully calculated multi-million-dollar campaign, there is a glorious, unapologetic misfire that captures the spirit of its time in a way no focus group ever could. If you want to understand the pure, uncut absurdity of the 1980s, you need look no further than your local supermarket's cereal aisle, where a mohawked, gold-chained mercenary was staring back at you from a box of sugary cereal. This was Mr. T cereal, a breakfast food so perfectly illogical it could only have been born in a decade of excess, following his breakout role as the intimidating but lovable Bee. A. Baracus on the hit television show The A-Team, Mr. T was everywhere. His signature scowl, his piles of gold jewelry, and his famous catchphrase, "I pity the fool," had made him a pop culture superhero for kids. And what do you do with a children's hero? You put him on a cereal box. The product itself was a study in delightful contradiction. On one hand, the marketing leaned heavily into Mr. T's tough guy persona, The box featured a dramatic illustration of the man himself, arms crossed, his signature scowl in full effect. The slogan promised it was the cereal that's tough enough to eat, a line that perfectly encapsulates the bizarre logic of the endeavor. What did that even mean? Was the cereal going to put up a fight? Were the flakes armored? The reality, of course, was far less combative. Inside the box were sweetened corn and oat bits, shaped like little versions of Mr. T's mohawk and gold medals, alongside some brightly colored marshmallows. It was, for all intents and purposes, just another sugary cereal in a sea of sugary cereals. The genius and the sheer madness was in the pairing. Here was a man whose entire public image was built on strength, discipline, and a no-nonsense attitude, now endorsing a product that was essentially spoonfuls of sugar with a side of processed grains. The commercial for the cereal has since become a cult classic, a perfect time capsule of 80s advertising. It typically opened with a group of kids being, well, kids, maybe not eating a proper breakfast or lacking energy. Then, with a dramatic crash, Mr. T would appear, often bursting through a wall or descending from the sky to set them straight. He'd gruffly lecture the children on the importance of starting their day with a nutritious meal, all while holding a box of his namesake cereal. The disconnect between his intimidating delivery and the product he was holding was the entire comedic premise. He wasn't selling the cereal with a jingle or a dance. He was selling it with a scowl and a command. He was essentially bullying children into eating his cereal, and the audience loved it. It tapped into a childhood fantasy where the coolest, toughest guy you knew was also strangely concerned with your dietary fiber and vitamin intake. Ultimately, the cereal's lifespan was as brief and bright as the era that spawned it. It couldn't compete with the long-established giants of the breakfast table and faded from shelves after only a couple of years. But its legacy is far greater than its sales figures. Mr. T cereal stands as a monument to a different approach to celebrity endorsements, one that was less about a seamless brand fit and more about capitalizing on white-hot fame, no matter how incongruous the result might be. It was a testament to the idea that in the eyes of a child, there is no disconnect between a television action hero and their morning meal. If Mr. T said it was tough enough to eat, then it must be true. This wasn't about selling a lifestyle or an identity. It was about selling a feeling, the pure, unadulterated joy of seeing your hero in the most unexpected of places, telling you that it was okay to have marshmallows for breakfast. After the pure, sugar-fueled chaos of Mr. T, we find a different kind of force, one built not on bluster, but on an almost silent, unshakable power. In the world of celebrity endorsements, few figures have ever managed to project an aura of physical perfection quite like Chuck Norris. By the 1990s, Norris was already a living legend, a world-renowned martial artist and star of action films and television shows like Walker, Texas Ranger, where he routinely dispatched villains with a steely gaze and a single, devastating roundhouse kick. He was the embodiment of disciplined strength, a man whose very name had become shorthand for invincibility. So when the makers of the Total Gym needed a spokesperson, they didn't just find a famous face, they found a walking, breathing testament to the product's ultimate promise. They found a man who could sell fitness not with complex explanations, but with the simple, intimidating act of being Chuck Norris. The partnership, which began in the late 1990s and spanned over 2 decades, was a masterclass in perfect alignment. The Total Gym itself is a deceptively simple machine. It's not a rack of heavy weights or a complex network of pulleys and cables. It's a sleek, sliding board that uses your own body weight as resistance. The sales pitch was one of efficiency, safety, and full body conditioning. Who better to demonstrate that than someone who had built a formidable physique without, it was implied, the need for bulky, intimidating gym equipment. The infomercials were a hypnotic blend of direct response marketing and character-driven storytelling. They weren't just selling a piece of fitness equipment, they were selling access to the Chuck Norris workout philosophy. These infomercials became iconic in their own right, running for what felt like an eternity on daytime and late-night television. They typically followed a powerful formula. We'd see clips of Norris and his action hero prime, performing incredible feats of strength and skill. Then the scene would shift to a serene, well-lit home gym where a calm, approachable Chuck, often wearing a simple black gi or workout clothes, would guide the viewer through the total gym's exercises. His demeanor was quiet, almost gentle, but the intensity in his eyes never wavered. He wasn't yelling or making extravagant claims. He would perform a set of exercises with flawless, controlled form, his muscular physique providing all the visual evidence the viewer needed. The message was implicit but overwhelming. If this machine is good enough for Chuck Norris, the man who can defeat any opponent with his bare hands, then it is more than sufficient for you. What made this campaign so uniquely effective was its timing and its eventual rebirth in the digital age. For years, the infomercials played to a steady audience, building the total gym into a staple of home fitness. But then something fascinating happened. In the mid-2000s, the internet discovered Chuck Norris. A series of hyperbolic, humorous facts known as Chuck Norris facts began to circulate online, transforming the actor into a transcendent, mythical figure. Jokes like Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups, he pushes the earth down, or Chuck Norris can divide by zero became a global phenomenon. This viral memification didn't harm his endorsement power, it amplified it to a staggering degree. The total gym was no longer just associated with a tough action star, it was now connected to a near deity of popular culture. The sheer, over-the-top power of the internet meme reinforced the original marketing message. This machine builds almost mythical strength. The endurance of this partnership is a testament to its foundational genius. While other endorsements felt dated, Chuck Norris and the total gym only seemed to grow more powerful, seamlessly transitioning from a late-night television pitch into a cornerstone of internet lore, proving that the most effective endorsement is one that feels not just believable, but legendary. While Chuck Norris embodied a myth of rugged, individual strength built at home, the next campaign we'll explore took the idea of personal power and placed it firmly in the palm of your hand, wrapped in a dazzling package of pure celebrity fantasy. In the mid-2000s, the mobile carrier wars were heating up, and T-Mobile decided it needed a weapon not just of technology, but of sheer aspiration. They found their avatar in Catherine Zeta-Jones, an actress whose public persona was the very definition of a list glamour. She wasn't just famous, she was polished, sophisticated, and seemingly untouchable, gliding through red carpets and film premieres with an air of effortless elegance. The campaign that resulted wasn't a simple demonstration of call quality or data speeds. Instead, it was a surreal, multi-part narrative that presented a version of celebrity life so heightened, so lavishly orchestrated, that the cell phone itself became a magical talisman, a key to a world of flawless perfection. The commercials were structured like miniature episodes of a stylish television series, each one following Catherine as she navigated the absurdly luxurious challenges of her daily life. She wasn't playing a character, she was playing an amplified, satirical version of her own public image. In one iconic spot, she enters a bustling, trendy restaurant, and with a single, quiet command into her T-Mobile Sidekick phone, the entire establishment is instantly transformed. The loud music stops, the crowd of paparazzi at the door is silenced, and an obnoxious table of diners is magically whisked away, all to create a perfect, peaceful environment for her and her guests. The phone was not a tool for communication, it was a remote control for reality itself. It presented a fantasy where the annoyances and unpredictabilities of everyday life could be solved not through patience or diplomacy, but through the godlike power of a wireless service plan. This was the campaign's central, brilliant absurdity. It was completely detached from any practical benefit a real person might seek from their mobile carrier. The ads never mentioned network coverage, dropped calls, or pricing. The value proposition was purely emotional and aspirational. By using T-Mobile, the campaign suggested, you were buying a small piece of Catherine Zeta-Jones's command over her universe. Her sidekick wasn't just a phone, it was a loyal digital assistant that managed her schedule, her social life, and her environment with omniscient precision. The surreal comedy came from the juxtaposition of her immense, unflappable coolness with the trivial problems she solved. She wasn't using the phone to call for help in an emergency. She was using it to ensure a helicopter arrived on time to whisk her away from a dull party or to have a painting delivered to a museum because she felt it would look better there. What made this endorsement so memorable was its self-awareness. Catherine Zeta-Jones wasn't trying to be relatable. She was fully leaning into the public's perception of celebrity life as a gilded, frictionless bubble. She delivered her lines with a wry, knowing smile, as if she were in on the joke. The audience understood that this was a fantasy, but it was an incredibly seductive one. It tapped into a universal desire for control and for a life where every detail is perfectly curated. The T-Mobile Sidekick, a device that was genuinely popular for its innovative keyboard and messaging features, became iconic in part because of this campaign. It was transformed from a piece of hardware into a symbol of hyper-competence and glamour. For a few years, Catherine Zeta-Jones and her sidekick created a weird, wonderful, and utterly surreal pocket of advertising history where the most compelling reason to choose a cell phone carrier was the promise that it might just make your life as perfectly, effortlessly choreographed as a Hollywood star's. From the choreographed perfection of Catherine Zeta-Jones, we turn to a campaign that found its humor not in fantasy, but in the wonderfully awkward reality of a giant trying to fit into a very small world. Imagine a man who stands 7 feet 1 inch tall, a basketball Hall of Famer whose very name, Shaquille O'Neal, evokes images of towering power and slam dunks that shook backboards. Now picture that same man squeezed into a compact, brightly lit office set, sitting behind a standard issue desk that looks like it was borrowed from a child's playroom, earnestly discussing the intricacies of liability coverage and multi-policy discounts. This was the brilliant, bizarre premise of Shaquille O'Neal's endorsement for the General Insurance, a partnership that took one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet and placed him in the most incongruous setting imaginable to sell one of life's most mundane necessities. The sheer genius of this campaign lay in its embrace of the obvious physical comedy. Shaq never tried to downplay his size, he weaponized it for laughs and memorability. In the commercials, he would navigate the miniature office environment with a gentle, self-aware clumsiness. A normal-sized pen looked like a toothpick in his massive hand. He would struggle to fit into a rolling desk chair or duck comically low to pass through a doorway. The sets were deliberately designed to make him look even more out of place, creating a visual punchline that was impossible to miss. Yet, throughout the absurdity, he maintained his signature charismatic grin and a jovial, approachable demeanor. He wasn't a menacing giant, he was a friendly, gentle one who just happened to know a shocking amount about saving you money on your car insurance. This contrast was the heart of the ad's appeal. It took a product category that is often confusing, stressful, and deliberately complex, and reframed it as something simple, straightforward, and even fun. What made this endorsement so effective was the perfect alignment of Shaq's public persona with the General brand positioning. The General has historically marketed itself as an insurance provider for a different kind of driver, often those with less than perfect records who might feel judged or overcharged by other companies. Their messaging is built on accessibility and a no-fuss, no-judgment approach. Shaquille O'Neal, despite his superhuman stature, has always cultivated an image of being everyone's goofy, larger-than-life uncle. He's known for his playful social media presence, his dad jokes, and a personality that feels genuinely warm and inclusive. By having Shaq serve as the company's ambassador, the General was making a powerful, unspoken statement. If we're willing to welcome a 7-foot-tall basketball legend into our little office, we're certainly not going to turn you away. He became the ultimate symbol of their acceptance, using his immense likability to dissolve the anxiety often associated with buying insurance. The campaign's success wasn't just a flash of comedic genius, it was a masterclass in authentic brand integration. Shaq didn't just appear in the ads, he became a central part of the company's identity, even eventually joining their board of directors. This move signaled a deeper partnership, transforming him from a paid spokesman into a legitimate stakeholder which only strengthened the credibility of his endorsement. He wasn't just reading lines, he was, in a very public way, investing his own reputation in the brand. This long-term commitment allowed the campaign to evolve, with Shaq starring in dozens of spots over the years, each one reinforcing the same core message with fresh humor. He'd be shown trying to fit his enormous frame into a tiny, compact car, or using his championship rings as a visual aid to explain bundling policies. The campaign proved that an endorsement could be built on a foundation of pure, delightful absurdity while simultaneously being one of the most strategically sound and effective partnerships in recent memory, demonstrating that sometimes the most powerful way to sell a simple product is to have a giant show you how it's done. And that brings us to a partnership that took the very concept of the celebrity megadeal and elevated it into something closer to a corporate coronation. In 2012, the Cola Wars witnessed a seismic event when Pepsi signed Beyoncé Knowles Carter to a landmark contract reportedly worth a staggering $50 million. This wasn't merely an endorsement, it was an anointment. The title, Pepsi Global Ambassador, was bestowed upon a woman who already commanded the pop culture landscape, a figure her fans had long since dubbed Queen Bey. The deal was historic not just for its financial scale, but for its groundbreaking structure. A significant portion of that money wasn't just for Beyoncé to appear in commercials. It was directly funding her own creative endeavors, including a multi-million-dollar allocation for her own marketing projects, like music videos and live performances. In one bold stroke, the line between corporate sponsor and artistic patron was not just blurred, it was fundamentally erased. The commercials that resulted from this alliance were less like traditional advertisements and more like short art films, dripping with symbolism and high-gloss production. The most iconic of these spots opened not with a can of Pepsi, but with a series of tableaux featuring different versions of Beyoncé from throughout her career. We saw a nod to her Destiny's Child era, her early solo stardom, and her current status as an untouchable icon, all presented with a cinematic grandeur that felt more like a museum installation than a soda pitch. The central, powerful image was Beyoncé herself, seated on a throne in an empty, majestic hall, as various iterations of her past selves paraded before her. The message was unambiguous. Pepsi wasn't just buying a spokesperson, they were aligning their brand with a living legacy, a self-made monarch of pop. The product placement was almost an afterthought, a subtle prop in a larger narrative about evolution, power, and self-actualization. This grandiose approach, however, sparked intense debate and controversy. For many critics and fans alike, it raised a pressing question: can true art and corporate commerce ever coexist without one corrupting the other? Here was Beyoncé, an artist celebrated for her meticulous control and her message of female empowerment, essentially becoming a walking billboard for a sugary beverage. Detractors argued that no matter how artistic the commercials appeared, they were still part of a global marketing campaign for a product often criticized for contributing to public health issues like obesity and diabetes. The contradiction was stark. A performer who sang about empowerment and self-love was now implicitly encouraging consumption of a product many health advocates actively campaigned against. It forced a conversation about the compromises even the most powerful artists must make, and whether any amount of creative freedom was worth the potential dilution of their message. Yet, from another perspective, the deal was a masterstroke of modern branding and a testament to Beyoncé's unprecedented leverage. She hadn't sold out, she had, in a way, bought in. By securing funding for her own artistic projects, she effectively turned a corporate giant into her patron, using their vast resources to finance the very spectacles that solidified her legend. The Pepsi money helped bankroll the visually stunning videos for her self-titled album in 2013, allowing her to maintain an unparalleled level of quality and ambition. In this light, the partnership wasn't a compromise but a strategic conquest. She used the corporate machinery to fuel her own creative empire, demonstrating a new model where the artist doesn't just work for the brand, but the brand invests in the artist's vision. This wasn't William Shatner making a quirky jingle or George Foreman solving a household problem. This was a negotiation of power, a redefinition of what a celebrity endorsement could be in the 21st century. It was grandiose, it was controversial, and it perfectly reflected the era of the celebrity as a global, multi-platform corporation unto themselves. But where Beyoncé represented the cool, calculated peak of corporate artistry, our final entry takes us to the opposite pole of advertising, the raw, unfiltered, and gloriously loud world of the direct response pitchman. And in this arena, there was no greater king, no more powerful force of nature than Billy Mays. If you ever found yourself channel surfing on a lazy weekend afternoon anytime from the late 1990s onward, you likely encountered him. The image is unforgettable, a burly man with a thick, dark beard, perpetually dressed in a bright blue button-down shirt, standing in front of a chaotic tableau of stained fabrics and everyday messes. But before you even processed the visual, you heard him, that voice, a booming, gravelly baritone that didn't just speak to you, it commanded your attention, cutting through the ambient noise of your living room with the force of a foghorn. This was the high priest of household miracles, and his gospel was OxyClean. Billy Mays didn't just sell a product, he performed a kind of secular magic show, and every commercial was a live demonstration of his powers. The format was always the same, a ritual his audience came to know and love. He would present you with a problem that felt hopeless, a white t-shirt ruined by a massive red wine stain, a carpet desecrated by ground and chocolate, a greasy engine grime that seemed permanent. He would hold up the offending item with a look of grim determination, making you believe that all was lost, and then, with a theatrical flourish, he would introduce the hero of our story, a simple, white powdered substance he called, the one and only oxygen cleaner. The sales pitch was a relentless cascade of benefits, delivered in that signature staccato shout. He would talk about the power of oxygen bubbles, how they attack stains and lift them from the very fibers of the fabric. He wasn't just describing a chemical reaction, he was narrating a tiny, violent battle happening right there in a plastic bucket, and OxyClean was the undefeated champion. The true absurdity and genius of his endorsement lay in its complete and total lack of subtlety. This was not about building a brand image or transferring a feeling of coolness. This was about one thing, and one thing only, moving product, right now. Billy Mays was a master of creating a sense of urgency and necessity. He made you feel like you were incomplete, that your life was secretly filled with hidden stains and lingering odors, and that you were living in a state of domestic imperfection you hadn't even noticed until he pointed it out. His famous tagline, "Hi, Billy Mays here for OxyClean," became a cultural catchphrase, an immediate signal that you were about to witness something get obliterated by a white powder. He would perform side-by-side comparisons, showing a competitor's product failing miserably while OxyClean worked its magic, the water in the bucket turning a disgusting brown as the stain was power-lifted away. The evidence felt irrefutable, the presentation was impossibly energetic, and the result was a product that felt less like a cleaning supply and more like a household essential, a superhero in a tub. What set Billy Mays apart, and what cemented his legendary status, was the undeniable authenticity of his enthusiasm. While other celebrity endorsers felt like hired actors, Billy Mays was the product. His entire public persona was built around this single-minded passion for solving your messy problems. You never got the sense he was reading from a script. It felt like he truly, deeply believed that OxyClean was the greatest invention in human history, and he had a moral obligation to share it with the world. This wasn't an endorsement in the traditional sense, it was an embodiment. He wasn't a celebrity who used OxyClean, he was the OxyClean guy. His sheer force of will, his booming voice, and his relentless, joyful energy didn't just make the product famous. They turned a simple oxygenated bleach alternative into a multi-million-dollar empire and transformed Billy Mays himself into an American folk hero of commerce, a testament to the enduring power of looking directly into a camera and shouting about how amazing something is. And everyone finally believes you. Now, if the booming theatrics of Billy Mays represented one kind of raw, televised persuasion, a different kind of spectacle was unfolding on the world's biggest advertising stage, one built not on shouted demonstrations, but on pure, unadulterated glamour. Just a couple of years after May's passing, during Super Bowl 45 in 2011, a 30-second spot aired that would become a masterclass in selling a dream, not a product. The commercial was for Skechers and their flagship line of Shape-Ups toning shoes, and the face of this campaign was none other than Kim Kardashian, a woman who, at that precise moment in time, was transitioning from a reality television star into a full-blown cultural phenomenon. This partnership was a perfect storm of celebrity, controversy, and a fitness fad that promised effortless results, creating an endorsement that remains infamous as a prime example of how star power can be leveraged to sell a scientific fantasy. The commercial itself was a sleek, visually arresting piece of work. It opens not on the shoes, but on Kim Kardashian herself, shot in dramatic black and white, wearing a stunning, form-fitting dress and impossibly high heels. She is being photographed by a swarm of paparazzi, the flashes popping around her, embodying the very essence of red carpet celebrity. Then a voiceover from Kim cuts through the glamour, stating, "I've been working on my body, and I feel like I've really got my butt in shape." The scene then shifts to a gym setting where she is now wearing the Skechers Shape-Ups, a bulky, curved sole sneaker, and working out with a trainer. The message was ingeniously simple and psychologically potent. It wasn't just that these shoes could help you get in shape. It was that these were the shoes that helped Kim Kardashian achieve that body. The commercial sold an irresistible cause and effect narrative. Wear these shoes, and you are one step closer to possessing the kind of physique that commands global attention and defines beauty standards for an era. But the core of the controversy and the reason this endorsement is remembered so vividly wasn't the glamour, it was the science, or rather, the profound lack thereof. Skechers made bold claims that their Shape-Ups with their signature rounded rocker sole could promote weight loss, tone muscles, and improve posture simply by walking. They claimed the unstable sole forced the wearer to engage their core and leg muscles more than a standard shoe. However, these assertions were quickly challenged by the scientific community. Multiple independent studies found no significant difference in muscle activation or calorie burn between wearing Shape-Ups and regular athletic shoes. The American Council on Exercise concluded that the claims of superior toning were, in their words, too good to be true. The shoes were part of a larger toning shoe craze that swept the nation, preying on the universal desire for a quick, easy fitness fix without the hard work of dedicated exercise. Kim Kardashian's endorsement gave this questionable product an immense layer of credibility. Her famous curves became the ultimate testimonial, a piece of evidence that felt more compelling to millions of consumers than any clinical study could ever be. The backlash was swift and severe. The Federal Trade Commission launched an investigation, and Skechers ultimately agreed to a $40 million settlement in 2012 to resolve charges that it had deceived consumers with unfounded health claims. While Kim Kardashian herself was not named in the lawsuit, the settlement cast a long shadow over the entire campaign, cementing its reputation as one of the most misleading celebrity endorsements of the modern age. Critics slammed the partnership as irresponsible, arguing that using a celebrity of her stature to sell a product with dubious benefits exploited the public's trust and body image anxieties. The campaign became a case study in the ethical dilemmas of celebrity influence. It raised uncomfortable questions about the duty of a famous person to vet the products they endorse, especially in the health and wellness space, where the potential for harm, both financial and to one's sense of self, is very real. Yet, from a purely marketing perspective, the campaign was a monumental success in the short term. Skechers' sales skyrocketed, with the Shape-Ups line generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue at its peak. The Super Bowl ad ensured maximum visibility, and Kim Kardashian's involvement guaranteed endless media coverage and water-cooler discussion. The endorsement perfectly captured a cultural moment defined by the rising power of reality television stars and the public's fascination with their seemingly perfect lives. It demonstrated that in the new landscape of fame, credibility wasn't necessarily earned through expertise or accomplishment, but could be generated through sheer visibility and the curated presentation of an idealized body. The Kim Kardashian Skechers campaign stands as a stark, glittering monument to a very specific kind of absurdity, not the goofy, self-aware absurdity of a Mr. D cereal, but the sleek, seductive absurdity of a promise that seems too perfect to be true, sold by a face too famous to question. It reminds us that sometimes the most effective and most dangerous endorsements are the ones that sell us a fantasy we are already desperate to buy. But as we leave behind the high-gloss fantasy of the 21st century, we must travel back in time to a very different kind of performance, one steeped not in glamour but in gravitas. In the late 1970s and into the 80s, a surreal and somber presence began to appear on American television screens. There, in the dim, candlelit quiet of what appeared to be a wine cellar, sat Orson Welles. This was the man who, at the age of 25, had terrified a nation with his radio broadcast of The War of the Worlds, the visionary director behind what many still consider the greatest film ever made, Citizen Kane. He was a titan of 20th century art, a figure of immense intellectual and creative power. And now, in the autumn of his career, he was using that legendary, booming voice, a voice that could command armies or narrate the fall of empires, to sell Paul Masson wine. The result was not merely a commercial, it was a profound and bizarre cultural artifact, a moment where high art and commerce collided with breathtaking solemnity. The commercials were masterpieces of mood and contrast. While other alcohol ads of the era showed laughing couples at lively parties, the Paul Masson spots were funereal, almost monastic in their tone. Welles would be seated, often with a single glass of wine before him, the lighting casting dramatic shadows across his formidable frame. He wouldn't smile, he would brood. He would gaze thoughtfully into the middle distance, as if contemplating the very mysteries of the universe, before turning his attention to the ruby liquid in his glass. And then he would speak. His voice was a slow, deliberate rumble, each word weighed and measured for its full dramatic impact. The most famous line, the one that has echoed through the decades, was delivered not as a sales pitch, but as a sacred vow: "We will sell no wine before it's time." In that single sentence, Orson Welles managed to transform a simple production schedule into a philosophical principle. It wasn't about patience, it was about integrity, about a refusal to compromise with the hurried vulgarity of the modern world. The sheer absurdity of the situation was its genius. Here was one of the most celebrated artists in American history, a man known for his tumultuous battles with Hollywood studios and his uncompromising creative vision, lending his immense credibility to a mass-produced, mid-tier California wine. The disconnect between the messenger and the message was staggering. It was as if Shakespeare had been hired to write the copy for a lawnmower commercial. Yet Welles committed to the role with the full force of his theatrical power. He didn't just read the lines, he performed them with a conviction that made you believe Paul Masson was not a beverage but a legacy, a testament to a life well lived. The commercials felt less like advertisements and more like scenes from a one-act play about a world-weary king reflecting on his kingdom's finest vintage. He made the act of choosing a wine feel like a moment of profound cultural and personal significance. Behind the scenes, however, the reality was far from the serene perfection depicted on screen. Numerous anecdotes, many confirmed by the crew, paint a picture of a deeply frustrated artist. Welles was reportedly difficult, often forgetting his lines or ad-libbing in ways that didn't fit the script. The famous tagline itself was a source of contention. There are stories of him stumbling over the phrase, allegedly quipping in exasperation, "We will sell no wine before it's time, but we will sell a lot of it after." This glimpse behind the curtain only adds to the campaign's strange legend. It reveals the inherent tension of the celebrity endorsement, the struggle between the artistic soul and the commercial demand. The Orson Welles we saw on screen was the myth, the monumental figure. The man trying to remember his lines for a wine commercial was the reality, a giant navigating the sometimes humiliating necessities of earning a living. Ultimately, the legacy of Orson Welles for Paul Masson is one of unforgettable dissonance. The campaign was a ratings success, making the brand a household name and the tagline a part of the American lexicon. But its true impact lies in how it showcased the raw, transferable power of authority. Paul Masson wasn't selling the taste of their wine, they were selling the sound of Orson Welles' voice. They were selling his implied good taste, his sophistication, his timelessness. In a media landscape increasingly filled with noise and flash, these commercials commanded attention through sheer, unapologetic quiet and depth. They created a bizarre pocket of high culture within the everyday flow of television programming, a solemn, almost sacred space where, for 30 seconds, the choice of a dinner wine felt like the most important decision you would make all day, simply because Orson Welles, with the gravity of a prophet, told you it was. From the hallowed, candlelit cellars with Orson Welles, we crossed the Pacific to find another actor known for his formidable presence, though one of a very different kind. If Welles was the brooding intellectual giant, then Tommy Lee Jones is the embodiment of stoic, Southwestern grit. For decades, he has built a career on playing men of few words and decisive action, from the relentless U.S. Marshal in The Fugitive to the world-weary sheriff in No Country for Old Men. His face is a roadmap of hardened resolve, his voice a dry, gravelly instrument that seems more suited to delivering ultimatums than pleasantries. So, when the Japanese spirits giant Suntory decided to launch its premium whiskey line in the United States, they made a choice that was at once baffling and brilliant. They chose Tommy Lee Jones to be their American face, and the resulting commercials were not just ads. They were masterclasses in the art of stark, powerful contrast. The campaign, which launched in the mid-2000s, presented a version of Tommy Lee Jones that was both familiar and utterly transformed. The setting was always minimalist, often just a quiet, elegant room or a stark landscape. There were no elaborate plots, no slapstick humor, no attempts to soften his iconic tough guy image. Instead, the camera would simply linger on Jones as he sat, holding a glass of Suntory whiskey. He wouldn't smile, he wouldn't even look directly at the camera for long. His gaze was often distant, contemplative, as if he were searching for the right words to describe a profound, almost ineffable experience. And then he would speak, his voice a low, deliberate rumble, delivering lines that felt less like a sales pitch and more like fragments of a late-night philosophical meditation. He spoke of time, of craftsmanship, of the subtle complexities that separate the merely good from the truly exceptional. In one spot, he famously muses, "Why is taste so hard to describe? Is it memory? Is it desire?" This was a far cry from the typical whiskey ad filled with laughing friends and clinking glasses. This was a solo journey into the soul of a drink. The profound effectiveness of this campaign lay entirely in its embrace of Jones's unshakable authenticity. Suntory wasn't asking him to be anything other than exactly who the audience perceived him to be, a man of substance, integrity, and serious taste. When Tommy Lee Jones, a person you absolutely believe would not suffer fools, looks you in the eye and tells you that this whiskey is worth your time and consideration, you are inclined to believe him. There is no wink to the camera, no hint of self-parody. The commitment is total. This gruff, no-nonsense actor, who seems like he'd be more at home with a cheap beer after a long day, was instead presenting himself as a connoisseur, and the sheer unexpectedness of that image commanded attention. It forced the viewer to reconsider not just the whiskey, but the very nature of refinement. The message was that true sophistication isn't about pretense or flash, it's about the quiet confidence to appreciate something complex, a confidence embodied perfectly by Jones's silent, powerful demeanor. What made these spots so memorable was their sheer tonal audacity. In an American advertising landscape often dominated by high-energy pitches and quick cuts, the Suntory commercials were slow, quiet, and almost defiantly serious. They created a pocket of zen-like calm in the middle of a hectic television lineup. They didn't try to sell you on a party or a lifestyle, they sold you on a moment of solitary reflection. The product itself became a character in this minimalist drama, a symbol of earned wisdom and quiet satisfaction. The campaign demonstrated that an endorsement doesn't require a celebrity to be relatable. Sometimes it's more powerful for them to remain utterly enigmatic, allowing their formidable credibility to transfer directly to the product through the sheer force of their unblinking conviction. Tommy Lee Jones didn't just recommend Suntory whiskey, he bestowed upon it his own hard-won aura of authenticity, proving that the most compelling recommendation can sometimes be delivered in a whisper from a man the world is used to hearing shout. And then there are the characters, the fictional personalities who become so ingrained in our consciousness that they transcend their commercial origins to become celebrities in their own right. In the often dry and impersonal world of insurance, where the fine print can feel intentionally daunting, one company decided to take a radically different approach. They didn't hire a famous athlete or a movie star. Instead, they created one from scratch. Meet Flo, the perpetually cheerful, slightly manic, and utterly unforgettable spokesperson for Progressive Insurance. What began as a simple advertising character has evolved into a cultural touchstone. A fictional woman whose absurdly long and successful run has proven that sometimes the most powerful celebrity is the one you invent yourself. The character of Flo, portrayed with brilliant commitment by actress Stephanie Courtney, first appeared on our screens in 2008. The world of insurance advertising at the time was dominated by two primary archetypes: the stern, authoritative figure who explained complex policies, and the comical mascot, like the gecko, who offered a dose of charm. Flo arrived as something entirely new. She wasn't an expert explaining deductibles in a boardroom. She was an employee on the front lines, a salesperson in a surreal, blindingly white, and endlessly stocked superstore for insurance. Her uniform, a pristine white apron with a Progressive logo over a simple blue dress, became an instantly recognizable costume, but it was her personality that truly broke the mold. Flo was unnervingly upbeat, her smile fixed in a wide, unblinking grin, her energy levels dialed permanently to 11. She spoke with a rapid-fire, almost stream-of-consciousness delivery, peppering her explanations of bundling home and auto coverage with quirky asides and surreal metaphors. She wasn't just selling insurance, she was hosting a bizarre, one-woman game show where the prize was peace of mind and the theme was organized chaos. The sheer absurdity of the concept is what made it so genius. Here was an industry built on assessing risk, predicting tragedy, and dealing with the stressful aftermath of accidents, being represented by a woman who treated it all with the giddy excitement of a child in a candy store. Flo's world was a place where fender benders and kitchen fires were not calamities, but mere opportunities to demonstrate the seamless efficiency of Progressive's claims process. This deliberate contrast between the mundane, often anxiety-inducing product and Flo's relentlessly sunny disposition created a hilarious and memorable dissonance. She made the complex and boring feel simple and, against all odds, fun. Her slightly unhinged persona, whether she was fending off a flirtatious baker character named Jamie or battling her rival, the smug spokesperson for a competitor, never felt threatening. Instead, it felt endearing. She was the over-enthusiastic coworker everyone knows, the one who genuinely loves their job a little too much, and her commitment to the bit was so total that it became completely believable. Over more than a decade, Flo has achieved something rare for a fictional ad character. She has grown and evolved, developing a rich backstory and a supporting cast that rivals a sitcom. We've met her eccentric family, including her mother and a brother who is her exact opposite. We've seen her celebrate holidays, face workplace challenges, and even explore her personal life, all within the confines of 30-second commercials. This long-form storytelling has fostered a remarkable sense of familiarity and affection from the audience. People don't just recognize Flo, they feel like they know her. Stephanie Courtney's performance is the bedrock of this success. She infuses Flo with a genuine warmth beneath the quirkiness, ensuring the character never becomes a grating caricature. She's the weird, wonderful friend you root for, and her success within the ad's narrative makes you subconsciously root for Progressive, too. The result of this meticulously crafted absurdity is one of the most successful and enduring advertising campaigns in history. Flo didn't just make Progressive a household name, she fundamentally changed the company's brand identity, transforming it from just another insurance provider into the quirky, customer-friendly company with that fun, white-apron lady. The campaign's longevity is a testament to its power. In an age of shortening attention spans and rapid commercial turnover, Flo has remained a constant, a familiar face in a sea of changing marketing strategies. She demonstrates that in the crowded marketplace of ideas, creating a truly unique and engaging character can be far more powerful than simply renting a famous face. Flo became a celebrity not through pre-existing fame, but through sheer, persistent, and wonderfully absurd presence, proving that sometimes the best way to sell something boring is to invent someone unforgettable to do the talking. From the invented cheer of Flo, we now pivot to a partnership built on a very different and far more visceral kind of energy. Imagine the scene, a stark, minimalist setting, all shadows and hard surfaces. And into that space steps a figure who needs no introduction, a man whose very name evokes a specific, raw power. Mike Tyson, the former heavyweight champion of the world, a fighter whose ferocity in the ring was the stuff of legend and whose life outside it was a whirlwind of controversy and public fascination. Now in the mid-2010s, this same man, his face adorned with its iconic tribal tattoo, his voice still possessing that distinct, high-pitched lisp, is standing before a camera. But he isn't here to talk about boxing or comebacks or his past. He is here to calmly, methodically, demonstrate the features of a civilian's self-defense weapon, the Taser Pulse. The resulting commercials were not just surprising, they were a masterclass in surreal branding, a jarring collision of a man once known as the baddest man on the planet and a product designed for non-lethal personal protection. The advertisements themselves leaned fully into the bizarre and unsettling contrast. In one particularly memorable spot, Tyson is shown in a dimly lit, almost clinical environment, holding the compact, yellow and black Taser device. He speaks directly to the camera, his delivery unnervingly calm and measured, a stark departure from the explosive persona of his youth. He walks the viewer through the product's specifications, its range, its ability to deliver a neuromuscular incapacitation, its built-in laser sight. He demonstrates how to load the cartridge with a quiet, practiced efficiency. The most powerful moment, however, comes when he discusses the importance of safety and responsible ownership. To hear Mike Tyson, a man whose fists were once considered lethal weapons, explaining the prudent use of a non-lethal alternative, created a cognitive dissonance that was both fascinating and deeply strange. It was as if a lion was giving a seminar on the ethical consumption of vegetables. The sheer genius of this endorsement, from a marketing perspective, was its undeniable memorability. Taser, the company, understood that in a crowded market for personal safety, they needed to cut through the noise. Aligning their brand with Mike Tyson wasn't a logical fit, it was a psychological one. They weren't selling the Taser Pulse based on its technical merits alone. They were selling it based on the implied, terrifying authority of its spokesman. The unspoken message was potent. If Mike Tyson, a man who could theoretically dismantle most threats with his bare hands, sees the value in carrying a taser for his own personal security, then what possible argument could an average citizen have against owning one? His endorsement served as the ultimate stress test. It framed the product not as a tool for the fearful, but as a pragmatic choice for anyone, even for someone who represented the absolute peak of human offensive capability. Yet this partnership also sparked a complex and unavoidable conversation about redemption, reinvention, and the nature of celebrity in the modern age. By the time these ads aired, Mike Tyson had undergone a remarkable public transformation. He was no longer the feared and troubled young champion, but an elder statesman of sorts, a popular podcaster and a recurring figure in comedy films, having fully embraced a self-aware and often humorous public persona. The Taser campaign cleverly tapped into this new chapter of his life. It acknowledged his violent past while simultaneously presenting a new, controlled, and responsible version of the man. He wasn't promoting violence, he was promoting a tool to avoid it. This nuanced repositioning allowed the audience to engage with the ad on multiple levels, as a piece of surreal comedy, as a sharp marketing tactic, and as a symbol of a person's capacity for change. The campaign proved that the most powerful endorsements aren't always about a perfect alignment of values, but can instead be about harnessing the entire, complicated narrative of a celebrity's life to create a message that is impossible to ignore and even harder to forget. But what happens when the celebrity and the brand aren't just aligned, but are one and the same? We move now from the surreal world of Mike Tyson selling tasers to a phenomenon that was, in its own way, just as conceptually audacious. In the late 1980s and throughout the 90s, two child stars began to build an empire not by endorsing a product, but by becoming the product itself. Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, the cherubic twins who shared the role of Michelle Tanner on the smash hit sitcom Full House, leveraged their overwhelming cuteness and ubiquity into a business venture of staggering proportions. Their company, Dual Star Entertainment, didn't just license their faces for a line of lunchboxes. It created an entire universe of consumer goods where the only thing being sold was more Mary-Kate and Ashley. This was the ultimate meta-endorsement, a brilliant and bizarre feedback loop where their celebrity was both the engine and the merchandise. The strategy was deceptively simple, yet executed with relentless precision. Dualstar flooded the market with a staggering array of products, all bearing the twins' images and names. For a generation of young girls, you could live a completely Olsen-saturated life. You could watch them in a series of direct-to-video movies where they played dual roles, often involving travel, adventure, and lighthearted mystery. You could read their book series, which continued the adventures of their video selves. You could wear their clothing line from Walmart, spray on their perfume, decorate your room with their posters, play their video games, and even sing along to their pop music albums. The branding was inescapable, a pastel-colored tsunami of merchandise that transformed the girls from actresses into a lifestyle brand. The genius was in the direct-to-video model. They bypassed the gatekeepers of network television and Hollywood studios, creating a steady, reliable stream of content that functioned as 90-minute commercials for the entire Dualstar product ecosystem. What made this endorsement so uniquely powerful and perhaps a little unsettling was its psychological core. For their young audience, this wasn't a traditional endorsement where a famous person you admired recommended a product they used. This was an invitation into a perceived friendship. Mary-Kate and Ashley were presented not as distant, untouchable stars, but as relatable peers. Their movies and books often depicted them as regular girls in extraordinary circumstances, making their fans feel like they, too, could be a part of that world. Owning a Mary-Kate and Ashley shirt or watching their latest movie wasn't just a purchase, it was an act of affiliation, a way to feel connected to the bubbly, adventurous twins you saw on screen. The line between the performer and the product was completely erased. You weren't buying a shirt, you were buying a piece of a friendship, and the entire commercial enterprise was built on the powerful, parasocial bond between the celebrity and the consumer. This level of commercial saturation, however, raised its own set of complex questions. While undeniably brilliant as a business model, it existed in a gray area of child stardom and consumer culture. The girls were the brand, but they were also minors, their images and identities commodified from an extremely young age. The empire was built on their likability and accessibility, yet it also created an environment where their every move was a potential marketing opportunity. As they grew older, the brand struggled to evolve with them, attempting to pivot into a more mature, fashion-forward image that never quite captured the magic of their tween years. The sheer scale of the operation was both its greatest strength and its most peculiar feature. At its peak, Dualstar was generating over $1 billion in retail sales annually, a figure so immense it transformed the Olsens from child stars into preteen moguls, a status that was as bizarre as it was impressive. Ultimately, the legacy of Mary-Kate and Ashley's self-endorsement empire is a fascinating case study in the limits and possibilities of fame. They demonstrated that celebrity could be industrialized, packaged and sold directly to a target audience with breathtaking efficiency. They were pioneers in the direct-to-video market and masters of vertical integration, controlling their content and their merchandise under one corporate roof. While the empire eventually waned as they entered adulthood and pursued other interests, chiefly high fashion with their acclaimed brand, The Row, the blueprint they created remains influential. They prove that the most powerful endorsement isn't always a famous person telling you to buy something else. Sometimes, the most potent and peculiar strategy is for the famous person to simply become everything you could possibly want to buy, turning your own stardom into the ultimate, all-encompassing product. Now imagine the power of a single sound in a sea of silence, a test of clarity so simple it became the stuff of advertising legend. In the highly competitive long-distance wars of the 1990s, Sprint needed a way to cut through the noise and convince America that its network was superior to AT&T and MCA. Their solution was a marketing campaign of pure theatrical genius. They didn't hire a comedian or a sports star. Instead, they turned to two actors whose voices were instruments of authority and menace, men who could make reading a phone book sound like a prophecy. They cast James Earl Jones and Malcolm McDowell and gave them a single, dramatic mission to engage in a battle of oral precision over the quietest pin drop you have ever heard. The commercial, which aired during major television events like the Super Bowl, was a masterclass in minimalist tension. It opens in a vast, shadowy space that feels more like a cathedral or a supervillain's lair than a phone company's set. James Earl Jones sits at one end of a long, polished table, his presence immediately commanding. At the other end sits Malcolm McDowell, a glint of playful challenge in his eyes. These were not just famous faces, they were voices that came pre-loaded with gravitas. Jones, of course, was the booming, paternal voice of Darth Vader and the iconic "This is CNN" announcement. McDowell was the anarchic, chilling presence from A Clockwork Orange. Their very casting was a statement. This is not a trivial matter. The clarity of your phone call is a subject worthy of Shakespearean deliberation. The spot unfolds with the solemnity of a high-stakes duel. Jones speaks first, his voice a resonant, earth-shaking baritone that seems to vibrate through the screen. The point is, he intones, "Can you hear a pin drop?" On cue, a single straight pin falls onto the table with an impossibly crisp, clear ping. The sound is startling in the silence. Then it's McDowell's turn. He leans in slightly, his voice a sharper, more silvery instrument, laced with a knowing irony. "I can," he replies with a smirk that suggests he's already won. But Jones isn't finished, he counters. "But can you hear a pin drop on a carpet?" The scene cuts to a plush, deep pile carpet. Another pin drops. This time there is no metallic ring, only the faintest, softest thud. The challenge is made. This was the core of Sprint's value proposition. Their network was so clear, so free of static and interference, that it could carry not just a loud noise, but the most subtle, muffled sound from one end of the country to the other. The sheer absurdity and brilliance of this campaign lay in its elevation of a mundane service into an epic quest for acoustic perfection. Sprint was selling long-distance minutes, a commodity that most people found confusing and interchangeable. By framing their advantage as a pin drop, they created a simple, tangible, and unforgettable metaphor for clarity. You didn't need to understand fiber optics or network switches. You just needed to remember that Sprint was the company so committed to sound quality that they hired two theatrical giants to debate the acoustics of a falling pin. The actors played their roles with utter conviction, never breaking character or winking at the camera. They treated the pin drop with the same gravity they would bring to a soliloquy, and in doing so, they made the audience believe it was a matter of the utmost importance. This campaign became an instant classic, winning advertising awards and cementing itself in pop culture memory. It was a perfect alignment of celebrity, concept, and brand. James Earl Jones and Malcolm McDowell didn't just lend their voices, they lent their entire dramatic personas. The campaign used the audience's pre-existing associations, Jones with power and reliability, McDowell with cunning and precision, and transferred those qualities directly to the Sprint network. For a few years in the 90s, the question of who had the clearest long-distance service was answered not with a chart or a graph, but with the crisp, clean sound of a pin hitting a table, narrated by two of the most unmistakable voices in the world. It was a reminder that in the right hands, even the simplest test could feel like high drama, and that the most effective way to sell a technical advantage was to turn it into a piece of pure, captivating theater. But if the Sprint pin drop campaign represented a kind of theatrical high-mindedness, the fast food industry has always thrived on a very different kind of theater altogether, one of pure, unfiltered spectacle designed to shock the system and command attention. And no commercial better captured the early 2005's zeitgeist of shock and awe marketing than Paris Hilton's legendary spot for Carl's Jr. To understand the sheer cultural impact of this advertisement, you have to first recall the unique nature of Paris Hilton's fame at that precise moment. She wasn't an actress in the traditional sense, nor was she a singer. She was the original, famous for being famous socialite, the star of the reality show, The Simple Life, and a permanent fixture in the tabloids. Her persona was a carefully crafted blend of glamour, wealth, and a seemingly ditzy, baby voiced effect. She was, in essence, a walking brand built on luxury and desirability. So when Carl's Jr., a fast food chain known for its hearty, messy burgers marketed primarily to young men, decided to hire her, it wasn't just a celebrity endorsement. It was a cultural atom bomb, a deliberate collision of high-gloss aspiration with down and dirty indulgence. The commercial itself, which premiered during the Super Bowl in 2005, was a masterwork of provocative, over-the-top imagery. It opens not on a burger, but on a glistening, spotless black Bentley Continental GT, parked in a lavish, sun-drenched driveway. Then we see Paris Hilton, clad in a tiny, black bikini, holding a sponge and a bucket of soapy water. What follows is a sequence that is less an advertisement for a spicy barbecue burger and more a soft-core parody of a car wash. As a sultry instrumental version of the song "I Love Paris" plays, Hilton proceeds to wash the luxury vehicle with a slow, deliberate, and intensely suggestive choreography. She slides across the hood, caresses the fenders, and sprays the car with a hose in a manner that leaves very little to the imagination. The entire sequence is filmed with the gauzy, high-production sheen of a music video. And then, the climax, she picks up the Carl's Jr. spicy burger, takes an enormous, messy bite, and then, in the ad's most infamous and talked-about moment, lets out a moan of sheer pleasure as a dollop of sauce drips down her chin. The burger, in this context, wasn't just food. It was an object of fetishistic desire, a co-star in a minute-long fantasy of wealth, sex, and greasy satisfaction. The immediate and overwhelming reaction was a firestorm of controversy. Critics, particularly parent and watchdog groups, lambasted the ad as overtly sexualized and fundamentally inappropriate for a broad television audience, especially one that included the Super Bowl. They argued it was a blatant example of using a woman's body to sell a completely unrelated product, reducing Paris Hilton to a literal object of desire whose purpose was to create a hormonal association between her sexuality and a $6 burger. The commercial was pulled from certain daytime rotations almost immediately due to the volume of complaints. Yet, from a purely marketing perspective, the campaign was an undeniable, monumental success. It achieved that most coveted of advertising goals. It became a water cooler moment. It was dissected on news programs, debated on talk shows, and written about in publications that would never normally cover fast food promotions. The controversy didn't hurt Carl's Jr. It supercharged their brand visibility, making the spicy burger one of the most talked about products of the year. What made this endorsement so emblematic of its era was its perfect alignment with the emerging cult of celebrity. Paris Hilton wasn't selling the burger based on its taste or quality. She was selling it based on her own meticulously constructed identity. The ad was a perfect meta-commentary on her fame. Here was a woman famous for her wealth, her partying, and her sex tape scandal, now using that exact same notoriety to move product. The commercial knowingly winked at the audience, acknowledging that they weren't just buying a burger, They were buying a small, affordable piece of the Paris Hilton fantasy. It was a burger that promised to make you feel rich, glamorous, and a little bit naughty. This campaign perfectly encapsulated the mid-2000s shift where fame itself, regardless of its origin, became the most valuable currency. Carl Jr. understood that in an attention economy, the most effective ad wasn't necessarily the most logical one, but the one that generated the most buzz, and by leveraging Paris Hilton's unique and controversial star power, they created a piece of advertising that was less about the food and more about the spectacle, a true signature of the times. While some campaigns aim for shock value or comedic contrast, others seek to elevate the very act of selling into a form of high-concept art. In the fiercely competitive smartphone market of 2018, a relatively new player, OnePlus, made a bold move to distinguish itself from giants like Apple and Samsung. They didn't opt for a technical spec sheet or a flashy display of features. Instead, they turned to a man who had, both on screen and off, become a global symbol of technological transformation and charismatic genius, Robert Downey Jr. Fresh off his era-defining role as Tony Stark, the billionaire inventor who becomes Iron Man, Downey was more than just an actor. He was a walking metaphor for innovation and redemption. The campaign that resulted was a series of cryptic, visually opulent short films that felt less like a product pitch and more like a late-night, caffeine-fueled philosophy seminar. The centerpiece of this partnership was a 90-second spot titled "Never Settle," a phrase that doubled as the OnePlus brand slogan. The commercial is a whirlwind of symbolism and rapid-fire montage. It opens with Downey, dressed impeccably in a sharp suit, standing in a stark, industrial space. He doesn't hold the phone, he doesn't demonstrate its camera. Instead, he launches into a poetic, almost labyrinthine monologue that ponders the very essence of progress. What is the speed of an idea? He asks, the camera tracking his every purposeful stride. Is change a thing you can hold in your hand, or is it a whisper from the future? The visuals cut between seemingly disconnected images, a flock of birds taking flight in perfect synchrony, a close-up of a blooming flower, a shot of a vintage typewriter, and abstract, glowing data streams. The phone itself is treated not as a gadget, but as a glowing artifact, a talisman that appears briefly amidst the visual poetry, more of a muse than a tool. This approach was a deliberate and radical departure from traditional tech advertising. OnePlus wasn't selling megapixels or processing power, they were selling an intellectual identity. By associating their brand with Robert Downey Jr.'s cerebral and unconventional performance, they were making a powerful statement about their target audience. They weren't for the everyday consumer, they were for the thinkers, the creators, the visionaries who saw technology not as a utility, but as a catalyst for human evolution. The ads were dense with layers of meaning, demanding multiple viewings to unpack. Were the synchronized birds a metaphor for a seamless network? Was the blooming flower a symbol of organic growth through innovation? The campaign invited this kind of analytical engagement, creating a sense of an exclusive club for those smart enough to get it. The phone became a badge of intellectual curiosity, a piece of the future you could own if you were philosophically aligned with its messenger. The sheer brilliance and inherent strangeness of this campaign lay in its masterful leverage of Downey's own life narrative. The audience wasn't just watching Tony Stark ponder technology, they were watching Robert Downey Jr., a man who had famously rebuilt his career and his life from the ground up after very public struggles. His personal story of radical change and reinvention was the perfect subtext for a brand called OnePlus, the idea of always being one step better, of never settling for your current state. When he looked into the camera and asked, "What if we could rewrite our legacy?" the question resonated on multiple levels. It was about the phone, yes, but it was also a poignant echo of the actor's own journey. This depth of association gave the campaign a weight and authenticity that a simpler, feature-based ad could never achieve. He wasn't just a spokesman, he was a living embodiment of the brand's core philosophy. Ultimately, the Robert Downey Jr. and OnePlus partnership stands as a fascinating experiment in the outer limits of celebrity endorsement. It was a campaign that trusted its audience to embrace ambiguity and find meaning in the abstract. While it may have baffled some viewers who just wanted to know about battery life, it succeeded in creating a powerful and distinct brand aura. It demonstrated that in a saturated market, a company could choose to sell a feeling, an ideology, a spark of inspiration, and that sometimes the most effective way to do that is to hire a superstar, give him a poetic script, and set him loose in a beautiful, bewildering dreamscape where the product is not the hero of the story, but merely a key to a much larger, more intriguing conversation. But for every carefully curated persona and every slick, high-concept campaign, there exists a wild card, a force of nature so unpredictable that their very involvement defies all conventional marketing logic. And in the annals of advertising absurdity, few partnerships can match the sheer, unadulterated chaos of Gary Busey for Lending Tree. Here was a financial services company whose entire industry is built on a foundation of trust, stability, and predictable outcomes, deciding that the perfect spokesperson to guide families through the monumental decision of securing a mortgage was a man famously known for his stream of consciousness monologues, his intense and often bewildering intensity, and a public persona that could charitably be described as gloriously unhinged. The campaign that resulted was less a series of commercials and more a live-action case study in what happens when you hand the keys to the vault to a human tornado. The commercials themselves were mesmerizing in their strangeness. There was no script, at least not in any traditional sense. Instead, the camera would simply find Gary Busey, often in a plain setting like a blank studio or a simple room, and let him talk. And what followed was a torrent of words, a manic, free associating journey through the landscape of his own mind. He would pivot from the importance of comparing loan offers to a story about a pelican he saw on the beach, then loop back to interest rates with the kind of feverish conviction usually reserved for a prophet revealing divine secrets. His eyes would widen, his hands would gesture wildly, and his voice would oscillate between a conspiratorial whisper and a sudden, booming declaration. He wasn't just explaining a service, he was performing an exorcism on the very concept of financial boredom. The tagline, "When banks compete, you win," uttered by Busey, felt less like a corporate slogan and more like a cryptic piece of wisdom he just received from a talking squirrel. The sheer, breathtaking incongruity of this pairing was its most brilliant, if accidental, feature. Lending Tree deals in one of the most stressful, paperwork-heavy, and emotionally fraught processes in an adult's life. People want calm, reassuring experts when they're making a decision that will impact their finances for 30 years. Gary Busey offered the exact opposite, pure, uncut unpredictability. Yet in a bizarre way, this very lack of corporate polish became a perverse form of authenticity in a media landscape saturated with smooth, focused, group-tested spokespeople. Busey felt startlingly real. You couldn't possibly imagine him reading from a teleprompter or saying something he didn't believe. His manic energy, while unsettling, translated into a kind of frantic, genuine enthusiasm for the idea of saving money. It was as if Lending Tree had decided to bypass the carefully constructed facade of the financial world entirely and just unleash ID itself onto the American public. What this campaign understood, perhaps on a subconscious level, was the power of memorability at any cost. You might not remember the calm, trustworthy banker from a competing ad, but you would never, ever forget the image of Gary Busey staring directly into your soul while passionately explaining the benefits of a fixed-rate loan as if he had just discovered fire. He cut through the noise not by being relatable or authoritative, but by being a complete and total spectacle. The ads were shared, discussed, and parodied not because they were effective sales tools in a traditional sense, but because they were unforgettable pieces of performance art. They forced you to pay attention, if only to answer the single, burning question on everyone's mind: what on earth is he going to say next? In the world of celebrity endorsements, where control is paramount, the Gary Busey experiment was a thrilling, high-wire act of relinquishing all control, betting that the raw, unfiltered power of a truly unique personality would be more compelling than any safe, sanitized message could ever be. Yet after the whirlwind of unpredictable energy from Gary Busey, we find a campaign that discovered its power not in chaos, but in the quiet, steady comfort of the familiar, albeit from a very unexpected source. In the world of online rental marketplaces, a space often characterized by anxiety and uncertainty, one company made a casting decision that initially seemed as puzzling as it was brilliant. They chose Steve Buscemi. Now, for decades, Steve Buscemi had carved out a singular niche in Hollywood. He was the beloved character actor, the master of the eccentric, and the off-killer. His filmography was a gallery of memorable oddballs, nervous criminals, and unsettling figures, from the creepy kidnapper in Fargo to the jittery, paranoid rock and roll historian in The Big Lebowski. His face, with its distinctive features and wide, expressive eyes, was more readily associated with cinematic unease than with reassuring guidance. So when Apartments.com announced him as their new national spokesperson, the collective reaction was a mix of confusion and curiosity. How could the man who once asked, "Do you have to use so many cuss words?" in a Coen Brothers classic possibly become the friendly, trustworthy face of finding your next home? The initial surprise, however, quickly melted away into a wave of audience appreciation, and the reason was a masterful rebranding of the actor's own persona. The marketing team at Apartments.com didn't try to hide Steve Buscemi's unique qualities. They brilliantly repurposed them. Instead of the threatening oddball, he was repositioned as the ultimate relatable everyman. The commercials presented him as a knowledgeable, slightly weary, but fundamentally decent guide through the stressful jungle of apartment hunting. Dressed in casual, approachable clothing, he would appear in various rental scenarios, touring a potential new home, discussing amenities with a landlord, or offering practical tips to prospective tenants. His delivery was the key. He spoke in that same familiar, slightly raspy voice, but the lines were written with a dry, self-aware wit. He wasn't a slick salesman. He was the experienced neighbor who had been through it all and was here to give you the inside scoop, saving you from hidden fees and dodgy leases. The campaign acknowledged the audience's likely preconceptions and then immediately disarmed them, transforming what could have been a jarring mismatch into a perfect alignment of actor and brand. This successful pivot worked because it tapped into a deep-seated public desire for authenticity in advertising. In a landscape filled with impossibly perfect models and relentlessly cheerful spokespeople, Steve Buscemi felt real. He looked like someone you might actually meet while looking at an apartment. His presence implied that Apartments.com understood the process wasn't always glamorous. It was often frustrating, confusing, and required a healthy dose of skepticism. His inherent everyman quality, honed over years of playing regular guys in extraordinary circumstances, made him the ideal ambassador for a service built on a major, often stressful life decision. You trusted him not because he was an idealized figure of success, but precisely because he wasn't. He was Steve Buscemi, a guy who seemed like he'd probably read the fine print himself, and that made him the perfect ally in your corner. The campaign's genius was further solidified by its clever use of humor, which was always inclusive rather than alienating. One particularly memorable spot features Buscemi touring an apartment with a young couple. As the enthusiastic landlord rattles off a list of questionable features, like a chef's kitchen that is just a hot plate and a toaster oven, Buscemi stands silently in the background, offering the camera a series of subtle, knowing looks. His expressive eyes do all the work, communicating a shared understanding with the viewer that the listing might not be entirely accurate. This created a powerful bond of camaraderie. He wasn't lecturing the audience, he was standing with them, rolling his eyes at the same absurdities they faced. This gentle, witty approach made the complicated process of finding a rental feel more manageable and far less intimidating. It was a masterclass in using an actor's established screen persona not as a limitation, but as a foundation to build a new, equally compelling character, the trustworthy rental guru. Ultimately, the Steve Buscemi and Apartments.com partnership stands as a testament to the power of smart, counterintuitive casting. It proved that an effective spokesperson doesn't need to be a traditional matinee idol or a hyper-energetic pitchman. Sometimes the most resonant voice is the one that feels the most genuine, the most weathered by experience, and the most willing to acknowledge life's little inconveniences with a wry smile. By embracing an actor known for his eccentricities and reframing those very traits as marks of reliability and common sense, Apartments, Com crafted one of the most surprisingly effective and enduring campaigns of the modern era. It demonstrated that in a noisy marketplace, a little quiet, relatable charm can be far more powerful than the loudest and most conventional sales pitch. And so we arrive at a moment that feels almost inevitable in our digital age, an endorsement that was never officially an endorsement at all, but a piece of performance art so strange and so perfectly tailored to its star's public persona that it became more powerful than any corporate marketing campaign could ever hope to be. In 2019, Shia LaBeouf, an actor whose career has been a fascinating public navigation of intense method acting, personal turmoil, and avant-garde artistic expression, uploaded a video to his own social media channels. The video was raw, unpolished, and shot with the shaky, intimate quality of a friend's phone recording, and its subject was a product so mundane, so utterly unremarkable, that its pairing with a Hollywood star felt like a conceptual joke, a robotic potato peeler called the RoboPeel. The clip itself is a mesmerizing 2-minute descent into a very specific kind of madness. LaBeouf does not appear as a slick salesman. He is clad in a simple, possibly stained, white t-shirt, his hair unkempt, his eyes burning with a frightening intensity. He holds the plastic, battery-operated device, a small, claw-like contraption meant to hold a potato and spin it against a blade, as if it were a sacred relic. What follows is not a demonstration of efficiency, but a sermon on liberation. His voice rises and falls with the cadence of a street corner prophet as he explains how the RoboPeel has fundamentally altered his relationship with the humble spud. He speaks of the drudgery of manual peeling, the slavery of the old way, his hands gesturing wildly as he describes the emotional and physical toll of prepping potatoes for his family. With the RoboPeel, he declares, he is free. He is no longer a prisoner to the peel. The climax of the performance sees him finally activate the machine, its cheap motor whirring loudly as it clumsily attacks a potato, sending bits of skin flying in a chaotic spray. LaBeouf watches this not with the calm satisfaction of a problem solved, but with the ecstatic awe of a man witnessing a miracle, his face a canvas of manic joy and profound relief. The video ends as abruptly as it began, leaving the viewer in a state of stunned bewilderment, unsure if they have just witnessed a genuine product recommendation or a brilliant piece of satirical theater. The viral explosion that followed was instantaneous. The video was perfectly engineered for the meme economy of the internet, a format that thrives on the absurd and the authentically unhinged. It was shared, remixed, and analyzed across every major social platform, but the true genius of this bizarre moment lay in its complete ambiguity. Was Shia LaBeouf being sincere? Was this a desperate attempt to cash in on his fame during a career lull? Or was it, as many suspected, a sophisticated piece of performance art, a commentary on the very nature of consumerism, the cult of convenience, and the desperation of the modern influencer? LaBeouf never officially clarified his intentions, which only fueled the fire. He blurred the lines so completely that the act of questioning its authenticity became the entire point. In an era of highly polished, focus-grouped celebrity endorsements, the raw, unfiltered chaos of the RoboPeel video felt like a bolt of lightning, a refreshing, if terrifying, dose of something that felt real, even if that reality was entirely constructed. The aftermath was as peculiar as the video itself. The small company behind the RoboPeel, which had likely never imagined this level of exposure, saw its website flooded with traffic. The product, which retailed for around $30, swiftly sold out. The public, it seemed, was not necessarily buying a potato peeler, they were buying a piece of the performance. They were purchasing a tangible artifact from a viral moment, a conversation starter for their kitchen, and a physical connection to the bizarre and captivating spectacle Shia LaBeouf had created. The endorsement, if we can even call it that, demonstrated a seismic shift in the power dynamic of celebrity marketing. LaBeouf didn't need a brand to hire him. He became the brand, the director, and the entire marketing department himself. He proved that a celebrity's platform could be used not just to sell a product, but to sell an experience, an emotion, and a story, and that sometimes the most effective way to capture the world's attention is not with a multimillion-dollar Super Bowl ad, but with a cheap phone, a $30 gadget, and a willingness to fully and publicly lose your mind over a potato. Now imagine a world where you're not just buying a colorful candy, but you're entering a tiny, personified universe where each chocolate morsel has its own distinct personality, its own neuroses, and its own hilarious take on the human condition. For decades, the M&M's spokes candies have been a staple of American advertising, a rotating cast of animated characters designed to give a face and a voice to a simple treat. There's the cool and confident red, the sweetly naive yellow, and a host of others. But in 2019, the candy cosmos welcomed a new, grumpy, and utterly unforgettable resident, a character whose voice was so perfectly suited to the role it felt less like a casting choice and more like a cosmic alignment. The campaign brought us Danny DeVito not as a spokesman holding a bag of candy, but as the actual candy itself, transformed into a grumbling, cynical, green M&M. This wasn't just a celebrity lending his voice, it was a full-scale personality transplant, taking one of Hollywood's most beloved curmudgeons and shrinking him down into a tiny, edible form. The character itself, simply named the Green One, was a masterstroke of comedic casting. Danny DeVito's public persona, cultivated through decades of roles in shows like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and films like Throw Mama from the Train, is that of a lovable, chaotic, and often exasperated everyman. He's the guy who has seen it all, is impressed by none of it, and isn't afraid to tell you exactly what he thinks. The M&M's marketers took that entire well-established character and dropped him, quite literally, into the bowl. The commercials typically follow a similar, effective structure. The other M&M's, like the upbeat red and yellow, are trying to execute some standard, cheerful marketing plan, often involving a human consumer. Into this saccharine scene waddles the green M&M, voiced by DeVito, who immediately undercuts the positivity with a dose of brutal, hilarious honesty. His delivery is everything, that iconic, gravelly, Brooklyn-inflected voice, filled with world-weary resignation, comes out of this smooth, green candy shell, creating a delightful dissonance that is impossible to ignore. One of the most memorable spots in the campaign perfectly captures this dynamic. The scene opens with the red and yellow M&Ms excitedly preparing to be part of a woman's movie night. They're perched on a bowl of popcorn, envisioning a fun, cinematic experience. Then, from the shadows of the candy bag, emerges the green M&M, with DeVito's voice dripping with sarcastic disbelief. He immediately starts critiquing the human's life choices, from her questionable snack selection to her dubious taste in films. While the other candies are trying to be the perfect companions, the green M&M is the grumpy friend in your head, vocalizing all the petty judgments you'd never say out loud. He isn't there to sell you on the chocolate, he's there to commiserate with you about the minor absurdities of modern life, all while being, a piece of candy. This was the genius of the concept. They weren't using Danny DeVito to list product features. They were using him to inject a specific, relatable, and deeply funny emotion into the brand. What makes this endorsement so effective and enduring is its sheer authenticity. It never feels like Danny DeVito is slumming it for a paycheck. It feels like the role was tailor-made for his unique talents. He leans fully into the absurdity, delivering his lines with the same commitment and impeccable comedic timing he brings to a major film or television episode. The writers give him material that plays to his strengths: cynical observations, deadpan one-liners, and a general aura of benevolent misery. He became the candy you'd want to hang out with after a long, frustrating day, the one that wouldn't try to cheer you up, but would instead sit with you and complain about the weather. This partnership demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of modern branding. In an age where consumers are increasingly skeptical of traditional, shiny, happy advertising, the M&M's brand gained a massive dose of credibility and relatability by embracing a little humor and a lot of cynicism, all channeled through the perfectly grumpy vessel of Danny DeVito. It proved that sometimes the best way to sell a moment of sweet, simple joy is to hire a famously sour-faced actor to talk you right into it. After witnessing this dizzying parade of star-powered sales pitches for everything from robotic peelers to non-lethal weapons, it's natural to wonder, what is the actual method behind this marketing madness? Why would a rational corporation with millions of dollars on the line decide that the ideal face for their brand is a mohawked action hero, a futuristic starship captain, or a famously unpredictable actor? The answer lies in a fundamental, almost brutal truth of modern advertising. In a world saturated with thousands of commercial messages every single day, being forgettable is a far greater sin than being bizarre. The primary engine driving these absurd partnerships is the desperate, calculated need to break through the noise. A logical, sensible endorsement might be understood, but it is often instantly forgotten, lost in a sea of similar, sensible ads. An absurd pairing, however, creates a moment of cognitive dissonance so powerful it forces the viewer to stop and pay attention. When you see Mike Tyson calmly discussing a taser, your brain does a double take. That moment of confusion, that jarring disconnect, creates a mental sticky note. The ad isn't just another commercial, it becomes a story, a talking point, a piece of cultural trivia. In the ruthless economy of attention, being weird isn't a side effect, it's the entire strategy. This strategy works because of a powerful psychological principle known as celebrity transfer. This isn't about a logical connection between a star's expertise and the product's function. It's about the emotional and symbolic qualities of the famous person bleeding over into the inanimate object they're holding. When George Foreman puts his name on a grill, he isn't transferring his knowledge of boxing, he's transferring his identity as a beloved family man and a figure of triumphant comeback. The grill absorbs his aura of relatable strength and personal redemption. When Tommy Lee Jones speaks about whiskey, he isn't a sommelier, he's transferring his persona of stoic, uncompromising integrity. The whiskey becomes a symbol of substance and serious taste simply by being associated with him. The product becomes a vessel for the celebrity's story, and consumers, whether they realize it or not, are purchasing a small, affordable piece of that narrative. They aren't just buying a grill, they're buying a piece of George's comeback. They aren't just buying insurance, they're buying a piece of Shaq's inclusive, jovial personality. The weirder the initial pairing, the more potent this transfer can become because the lack of a logical link forces the viewer to focus entirely on the emotional and symbolic connection. This leads us to the counterintuitive heart of the matter. Sometimes, the more inexplicable the match, the more indelible the memory. Our brains are wired to notice and remember patterns that are broken. A movie star in a car ad is a pattern. A movie star in a potato peeler ad is a broken pattern, and our cognitive machinery latches onto it as something novel and significant. Consider the sheer staying power of Mr. T cereal. There is no rational reason why a cereal should be tough enough to eat, but that very illogic is why the campaign remains a cult classic decades later. Or think of the surreal tableau of Catherine Zeta-Jones for T-Mobile. The ads made no practical sense, but they created a unique, glamorous, and utterly memorable world that distinguished the brand from its competitors in a crowded market. The absurdity itself becomes the brand's signature, a unique fingerprint in a landscape of blurry, look-alike campaigns. It's a high-risk gamble, of course. A campaign can become memorable for all the wrong reasons, as seen with the backlash against the Skechers shape-ups. But when it works, it forges a connection with the consumer that is based not on reason, but on a shared, almost conspiratorial understanding of the joke, the spectacle, or the sheer audacity of the pairing. Ultimately, these bizarre endorsements hold up a funhouse mirror to our own culture, reflecting our obsessions, our desires, and our changing relationship with fame itself. They reveal a marketplace where credibility is no longer solely earned through expertise, but can be manufactured through visibility, authenticity, or even controlled chaos. The journey from the gravitas of Orson Welles to the surreal performance art of Shia LaBeouf charts an evolution in what we, as a society, find persuasive. We've moved from trusting authority figures to valuing relatable everyman, and now to being captivated by raw, unfiltered personality, however unpredictable it may be. These campaigns are more than just attempts to sell us things. They are fascinating experiments in social psychology, brilliant exercises in brand alchemy, and enduring reminders that in the strange and wonderful theater of American commerce, the line between the ridiculous and the revolutionary is often very, very thin. So as we wind down this wild ride through the Advertising Hall of Fame, or perhaps more accurately, the Hall of the Wonderfully Strange, it's worth taking one last look at the incredible landscape we've just traveled. We started our journey in the final frontier with William Shatner, a starship captain who boldly went where no negotiator had gone before, turning the complex world of discount travel into a series of cosmic quests set to a spoken word beat. From there, we watched a global sports deity, Michael Jordan, apply his otherworldly cool to the profoundly earthly comfort of a simple cotton t-shirt, proving that even a demigod worries about his underwear bunching up. Then came the ultimate pivot as George Foreman transformed from a heavyweight champion of the world into the heavyweight champion of the kitchen, a man who ultimately made more money from draining fat than he ever did from knocking out opponents. We witnessed the peak of pop spectacle where Britney Spears wasn't just selling a soda, but starring in lavish, mini-epic films where she literally battled musical genres for cola supremacy. We cringed and laughed as Mr. T, the toughest guy on television, tried to bully children into eating a cereal that was supposedly as tough as he was. We saw the quiet power of Chuck Norris, whose mere presence on a sliding board could sell millions of home gyms, and the surreal command of Catherine Zeta-Jones, who used a cell phone not to make calls, but to magically erase obnoxious diners from her personal reality. We marveled at the sheer scale of Shaquille O'Neal, who made choosing car insurance feel like a fun, comical adventure simply by being a giant in a tiny office. We explored the controversial frontiers where Beyoncé's artistic ambition met corporate patronage, and where Kim Kardashian's famous curves were used to sell a scientific fantasy wrapped in a sneaker. We sat in somber, candlelit silence with Orson Welles as he bestowed a sacred vow upon a mid-tier wine, and we pondered the mysteries of the universe with Tommy Lee Jones, who somehow made sipping whiskey feel like a Zen meditation. We were welcomed to the endless, cheerful insanity of Flo's insurance superstore, and then thrown into the unpredictable whirlwind of Gary Busey's mind, where loan comparisons shared airtime with philosophical musings on pelicans. And we saw the modern evolution of the form where Steve Buscemi's relatable cynicism became the perfect guide for apartment hunters, and where Shia LaBeouf's manic performance art for a robotic potato peeler blurred the very lines of what an endorsement is even supposed to be. What this entire parade of the peculiar reveals is that these strange alliances between fame and commerce are far more than just failed experiments or desperate cash grabs. They have become a unique and vibrant thread in the fabric of American pop culture, reflecting our changing values, our shifting relationship with celebrity, and our enduring fascination with the surreal. They are time capsules, capturing the spirit of their respective eras, the unapologetic excess of the 80s, the dot-com optimism of the 90s, the reality television spectacle of the 2000s, and the meme-driven, authenticity-craving chaos of today. Each one of these campaigns, in its own gloriously absurd way, represents a bold bet on the idea that being unforgettable is infinitely more valuable than being logical. These partnerships remind us that marketing at its most effective is a form of storytelling, and the best stories are often the ones that surprise us, that make us laugh, that make us scratch our heads, and that ultimately create a shared memory. They prove that the human brain is wired to remember the exception, not the rule. We may forget 1,000 straightforward, sensible ads, but we will never forget the image of a sci-fi legend selling hotel rooms, or a boxing champion selling grills, or a green candy shell containing the soul of a grumpy, beloved actor. This is the strange, wonderful alchemy of celebrity endorsement, where the right kind of wrong can sometimes be the most right decision of all. Now, we've covered a lot of bizarre ground, but the world of celebrity marketing is vast and endlessly surprising. This is where we turn it over to you. What are the most gloriously absurd celebrity endorsements that we missed? Was there a star-powered product pitch from your childhood that has been permanently seared into your memory? Maybe it was a famous athlete selling a questionable breakfast pastry, or a dramatic film star lending their gravitas to a household cleaner. Share your own favorite examples in the comments below. Let's see just how deep this rabbit hole of wonderful weirdness truly goes.